So physicalism is false. So what is physicalism? Well, physicalism is the idea that subjective mental phenomenon are composed of objective physical phenomenon. So it's basically the idea that your brain is a computer, and it performs computation and therefore consciousness. Obviously this does not follow, because what is computation? The thing is that computation doesn't objectively exist any more than the Latin alphabet exists. Because if I hold my hands like this, right, you might, and I ask you what does this mean? Obviously you can come up with a number of answers for that. You could say that, oh, this means 2, or maybe this means V, but it doesn't objectively mean that. This is an arbitrary configuration of matter. It doesn't objectively mean anything. But you see how that's a subjective projection from your mind onto the physical world. Right? You are the one who says that that means V or means 2 or whatever. You are the one who defines it. It could just as easily mean the collective works of Shakespeare, or the Boolean value of true, or the string ABC, or the number 564. It doesn't objectively mean what you think it means. And if you take a piece of paper and a pen and you write something on that piece of paper, does that objectively mean what you have written? Does the ink on the paper objectively mean what you have written? No, of course not. It's an arbitrary configuration of matter. You have just encoded information that is in your mind into the physical world. Oh fuck. But it doesn't exist objectively, it just exists in your mind. And the symbols, of course, that you write down do not objectively mean what you mean by them. And the words, of course, or the words that are constituted of symbols do not mean what you think they mean. So that's what language is, right? Is a system that we have in order to encode information that exists in our minds into the physical world. And obviously you can transmit that information to somebody else by sending them the letter, or sending them a letter, or you can speak it to them, in which case obviously is your mouth creating sound waves. But does those sound waves objectively exist? Does those sound waves objectively mean what they mean to us? No, of course not. When I say the word dog, does that objectively mean dog in the objective universe? No. It is language. Right? It's something that we define, not something that is objectively defined. Let's take another example. Let's take an abacus. And let's say that you take one of the rings on this abacus and drag it all the way to the right. And you say that this means 100. But does it objectively mean 100? No, of course not. The position of the ring is arbitrary. It doesn't objectively mean anything. It could just easily mean 5,000 or 300 or whatever. There is no objective definition there. But obviously an abacus helps you to do math, right? And you can process mathematics on an abacus. You can say that these things, these numbers, these rings mean numbers, and then you can process it, and it helps you do math that you otherwise would not be able to do because it's too complicated or whatever. And the same thing is true of writing, of course. Writing as well, of course. You can you'll write something down, and obviously you can write formulas down, equations down, numbers down, and it's going to help you to do math. but it's only in your head ultimately. It's not objectively defined. So how about a computer then? Well, in a computer, let's say you take a calculator, right? Does pressing the buttons on the calculator objectively mean what you think it means? Does pressing the button that has the symbol for 5 painted on it objectively mean 5? No, of course not. It doesn't. It's just that pressing that button encodes something specific inside of the computer, where the number is encoded into binary. Not really the number, but it encodes something into binary, right? And that is defined as 5. And how is that encoded? Well, it's encoded in binary, so it's encoded in ones and zeros. But there are no ones and zeros in a computer. There are no ones and zeros in a calculator. What there is electrical signals. So basically a sequence of high and low voltages, where we say that, let's say the high voltage is 1, the low voltage is 0, and that's how they're able to transmit the information from one place to another and to process it. But objectively speaking, there are no ones and zeros. The high voltage does not objectively mean 1, and low voltage does not objectively mean 0. It's just another language. And to say that binary exists, or that computers, or the computation in computers objectively exists, is as stupid as saying as a Latin alphabet exists, or that the rings on an abacus objectively mean what you have defined them to mean, right? So that's the problem. And here's my question. My question is this: how do you get something that objectively clearly does exist, like our consciousness? After all, it is through our consciousness that we even gain knowledge of the objective world, because we experience it both subjectively through our own subjective sensory experiences. So how then does that happen? Right? If our consciousness objectively exists, how can we get something that objectively exists from something that doesn't objectively exist but subjectively exists? You can't. And how do you get something that is particular from something that is entirely arbitrary? Obviously, our experiences, our subjective mental experiences, this subjective mental phenomenon, are particular, right? I experience joy as joy, and seeing the color red as seeing the color red, seeing the color blue as seeing the color blue. Smelling flowers as smelling flowers. I experience pain as pain, This is particular. This is not arbitrary. So how do you get something that is particular for something that's entirely arbitrary when there's nothing, you have nothing to anchor it to? So this is, of course, why physicalism is incorrect, objectively. Checkmate, physicalists. Hey, there's a bird.